Ah, there we go. The meeting has been started. That's why it seemed like we were speaking to the void. Everybody, just hang in there with my technical unsavviness with Teams webinars. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is being recorded, and anybody who registered will get a copy of the slide deck. This recording will be posted to our program website, southwestohiosolar.org, after the fact. And I will be presenting for about 30 minutes, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. I welcome your questions in the chat, preferably, or just hold on to them verbally until the end so that we can try and get through the slides, and then the panelists and I can help answer questions that are burning a hole in your pocket. So without further ado, I'm going to set up the presentation now. And just a moment while I swap my slideshow location. All right. Share. Well, welcome to our first webinar in our educational series for the Solarize Nonprofits program. My name is Nikki Vandevort. I'm joined by several of our partners on the program as panelists. Mariah Williams is the Ohio Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. Tierney Sheehan is the Communications and Impact Marketing Manager at RE-volv. And then Robert McCracken is the Energy Manager here at the City of Cincinnati, and he has actually gone through, all of our city elective pay processes. So I tapped him to join us. But again, if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. If you want to introduce yourselves, put it in the chat, and I'll be speaking for the next 30 minutes or so. Let's see. So our agenda today, we're going to be covering the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax credit, the investment tax credit, and the elective pay process that nonprofits and tax-exempt entities are able to receive through that those provisions. And we'll talk a little bit about the prohibited foreign entities rules. This is also sometimes referred to as FEOC or FEOC. It's an earlier acronym that they had that ultimately ended up as PFE related to the tax credit. We'll walk through how to claim elective pay, and then just finish up with a reminder on the Solarize Nonprofits approach and timeline. And this is a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer or an accountant, and this is not legal or tax advice. All of this information is available online. I primarily sourced it from Lawyers for Good Government, the NYU Tax Law Center, and the IRS. And these slides are dedicated to an audience that is pursuing development of a solar system under 1 megawatt in size. There are different requirements for projects that are larger than that in order to get the maximum amount of the tax credit. So, quick intro. The IRA, stands for Inflation Reduction Act, was introduced in 2022 and included a number of tax credits for clean energy generation and storage, as well as energy efficiency in buildings. But the ITC has been around since 1978, and it has come and gone in terms of the amount, and most recently has been a 30% baseline tax credit. Elective pay is new with the Inflation Reduction Act. So that is the process. It's sometimes called direct pay that allows tax-exempt entities like nonprofits, public schools, higher ed, local and tribal governments, and their subdivisions, so quasi-governments, and then houses of worship to participate in these tax credits, these federal tax credits, something that previously you had to kind of go through, if you had an installer, you had to kind of go through them to get some diminished amount of tax credit. The ITC is for clean energy projects like solar, battery backup storage, ground source heat pumps, but not for energy efficiency products or appliances or air source heat pumps or electric vehicles. Those were all covered on previous IRA tax credits, not the ITC. and many of those have been terminated early. And I just want to say that ITC has had a number of changes since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of last July. And so some of these technologies, like specifically solar and wind, have early termination now. So they will no longer be eligible for the tax credit sooner than some of these other technologies like ground source heat pumps, geothermal, nuclear, hydro, some of those things that, you know, individual organizations are definitely not investing in. Those are going till 2034, but for a lot of us, we're looking at a deadline of getting our projects placed in service by the end of 2027. And throughout this presentation, I have some common questions kind of peppered throughout. So one of the common questions we hear is, do you have to own the land or building where the solar system is located? As a nonprofit, you may not own your building. The answer is no, you don't have to own the land or the building, so long as the entity that owns the system has permission from the building owner to install it and long-term lease and plans to stay at that location. So just a broad, high-level discussion on elective pay. It's that provision that allows nonprofits to directly file with the IRS and receive the full value of the ITC and its bonus adder credits. Generally, you must pre-register your project. Once the project is constructed, there's an IRS portal you go online and register the project for. IRS will review, approve, and provide a unique registration number for each clean energy property, is what it's called, or each project. So if you had like a solar system and a battery like backup, those would be entered individually. They would each have their own unique registration number. And then you file your tax return before your deadline after you've gotten your registration number issued using Form 990T and Form 3800 and supporting documentation. And that is typically due 4.5 months after the end of your taxable year. So if this is the first time you've ever done this, the IRS has a 6-month extension for first-time filers, but you do have to actually ask for that extension. And your tax filing deadline is your deadline. You can't, if you file after the deadline, then you've lost access to the credit. After that, you receive payment. IRS reviews your tax filing. It could be up to a year after the project is placed in service or when your money was spent with your contractor to actually get that payment back. So you heard me say bonus tax credits. It's not just a 30% tax credit. It can be upwards of 70% if you stack these tax credits, but it can be kind of tricky. So the ITC is this 30% baseline tax credit. And again, I'm talking to an audience under 1 megawatt projects. The Big Beautiful Bill Act, I mentioned already, required an early phase out of solar and wind and also added these prohibited foreign entity rules. Projects will need to be placed in service by December 31st of 2027 at this point, if you're starting your project, you know, after this past 4th of July, which I think probably most of you are. And then, so these bonus tax credits you can see kind of add up. We've got a 10% tax credit for energy communities. That's for folks that are in a mapped area or doing a project on a brownfield. There's a 10% bonus tax credit for domestic content. So you're meeting those requirements for 100% American-made steel and iron, and then a certain specific percentage depending on the year for the manufactured components like solar panels, and then a competitive tax credit, bonus tax credit that can equal either 10% or 20% for being located in a low-income area or providing an economic benefit project for like a low-income residential building or like some sort of like rebate program, basically, for low-income residents. And just buzzword, placed in service will get thrown around a lot. That means in a condition or state of readiness and available for a specifically assigned function. In other words, the system is operational and can be switched on and is generating electricity. So who's eligible or what's eligible for inclusion in the ITC for solar projects? A lot of costs go into constructing an ITC eligible energy property, AKA your solar system, but only some of them can be included for consideration of the tax credits. Generally, eligible costs are related to direct labor, so your contractor's salaries, eligible equipment, the solar panels, the racking, the inverters, and the sales tax on it, the cost of permits that relate to the energy property, like your building and electrical permits. Can we mute?
Yeah, so.
Thank you. The cost of most behind the meter electrical property necessary to make the energy property work, and then pre-construction planning or eligible energy property project design costs, to the extent that they are directly related to your solar system. So another very common question that comes up is, are roofing costs eligible for inclusion? And everything that I've seen says like proceed with caution. Generally, if you're Googling it, everyone says no. And then you might find some things that say, well, maybe. We've met with some organizations that are very savvy at being able to track and connect, this roof update was specifically required in order to have a solar system on this roof. But just going in and saying, well, we need a new roof, we should really replace the roof or repair it before we put the solar system on, that's not going to cut it. So proceed with caution. Just a note on the investment tax credit, because we're talking to a lot of folks who may be dealing in grants or receiving grants, I wanted to present this scenario of, what happens if you've got grant funding that partially covers your project or fully covers your project, are you still eligible? So in scenario A, let's say, these would be giant solar systems, but let's say you had a $100,000 solar system and you got a grant that covered 85% of that, $85,000. And that leaves 15% that's not covered. You cannot take the full 30% tax credit because you're not allowed to have excess benefit. You can't make money on this project. But you can. Your credit would be reduced to the remaining amount of the full project value, which would be that 15%, that $15,000. Now, what if you had a grant that covered half of that project, $50,000? You can take advantage of the full $30,000 tax credit. And then in scenario C, you received a grant that covered the full cost of the project. You cannot receive excess benefit from the federal government, so you are no longer eligible for the ITC. And if you're a local government, if you use municipal bond financing, then there is an additional haircut penalty of up to 15% of the tax credit. Bonus tax adder credits. So again, I kind of went through this already. There's 3 different tax credits that are bonuses on top of that 30% baseline. There's a map for the question of, am I in an energy community? Brownfields are not included, but you would probably know if you were on a designated brownfield. And then this map, WRI has, it also includes a layer for the whether or not you are in a low-income community as defined by the federal statute. So it's helpful to just go check that map and see, could I potentially, could our project be eligible for those 2 if we chose to, pursue them and follow the requirements related to getting them. Common question. My organization is not located in a mapped qualified geography, but we serve low-income folks. Can we get the bonus tax credits? The answer is no. You must be located in a mapped census tract, or your project must be a qualifying low-income residential or economic benefit project. All right. The new prohibited foreign entities restrictions. Essentially, PFE restrictions were established to discourage and avoid work that's connected with covered nations. That's a defined term, and it refers to China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea through ownership, control, and sourcing of your materials for your, quote, qualified facility. That's also a defined term, which we're talking about your solar system. So there's 3 categories that these rules fall in. One is entity. So you look at your ownership and control of your organization to see if you have debt out to a covered nation bank, or maybe you have partial ownership by like an organization that is in Russia or China or what have you. So that's looking inward at your organization, the ownership and control of it. The next level is payments. So looking at payments made under contracts for the solar system. Maybe you if you were to contract with a installer that had ties or was partially owned by a company affiliated with those, based in those countries, covered nations. That's that next level. And then third is the material assistance. So looks at who produced the parts that went into your solar system. Violating one of these rules means you cannot claim the credit. And the first 2 categories are something that you can look into, but the third category should be the responsibility of your installer. It should be included in contracts that they need to track and document compliance with those rules. It's really easiest for them to do anyways because they're the one connected with the system. So bottom line, verification of compliance can be tricky. It's a best practice for entities to consult with experienced tax practitioners to determine how these restrictions may affect your project. If you have questions, there is pro bono assistance through Lawyers for Good Government's Elective Pay Sprint Hub. It can be very helpful, and they've been providing this assistance for quite some time now. So they're very adept at understanding all of the ins and outs of these rules. How to claim elective pay. So first off, you have to file a tax income return, specifically Form 990T. And in order to do that, you need to know your tax year. This could be your calendar year, January to December, or your fiscal year if you have one, which could be something like July to June. Many nonprofits don't file tax returns, so maybe you've never done this before, in which case you would need to establish one. And once you establish it by filing this tax return, that's kind of the one that has to be consistent if you ever file a tax return again. Let's see, if your organization is filing a tax return for the first time solely for the purpose of elective pay, you can choose to align your tax year with calendar year or a fiscal year if you have like an operational year that your organization uses. But yeah, just remembering that it will establish your tax year with the IRS. And so if you were ever to do a tax return again, you'd have to keep with that same year. There's a whole process for changing your tax years. And also just to say that once you've filed with the IRS for elective pay, that doesn't mean that you're reporting to the IRS like year after year after year after this. You're not committing yourself to filing a tax return in perpetuity. This is just for elective pay. The original filing due date for the tax return is the 15th day of the 5th month after the end of your tax year. So again, this is highlighted. I called it out earlier. You must submit your elective pay filings on time. If it's your first experience with elective pay, you can request a 6-month filing extension by filling out a specific form, Form 8868. Must be filed ahead of time before your original filing due date so that you can get that extension locked in. This, I want to speed up because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, but collecting, claiming elective pay, your pre-filing registration. This is just a list of some of the useful information or information that's going to come up in the portal. So there's that. The purpose of pre-filing. So you want to know your tax year first, and then you also have to pre-file before you can actually file your tax return. So pre-filing essentially allows the IRS to take a look at your project and issue you your unique registration number. There's a portal online that your authorized representative would create an account and go online and submit a lot of that information that was on the last slide. It's got prompts. The IRS has videos of a walkthrough of how to do this. They have this document here, publication 5884, as their user guide. Again, other things that like potentially Lawyers for Good Government could maybe assist with if it just seems, really overwhelming or confusing. But bottom line here is pre-filing should be completed at least 120 days before your tax filing deadline because the IRS may take up to 120 days of reviewing your pre-registration. So that's something really important to take away. There's kind of a stepwise, starting in the bottom, working our way to the top of what this process is to get to pre-filing registration, because in the meantime, you're getting a solar system constructed. So starting out, you want to know what your tax year is and make sure your organization has an EIN. This is your identification number. Generally, for the process, you would solicit and select a contractor, whether you're going through Solarize nonprofits, co-op, or working with RE-volv, and they're helping to solicit and select a contractor. You get to the point where you sign the contract. The contractor is going to help secure the permits and as well as the interconnection approval, and then begin construction. In that time frame, if you were thinking about moving forward and pursuing the low-income bonus credit that we talked about, that 10 or 20% credit that's competitive, it has a separate application, and you want to submit that application after you secure all your permits, but before you've placed in service. And you can't place your system in service until you know that you've gotten the credit. So that's just one thing that's unique to that particular bonus tax credit. So you've begun construction is completed, and you've placed in service, and now you can go into your pre-filing registration. So once you've gone through pre-filing and you've gotten your unique registration number, again, IRS has 120 days to review that, so it can take some time. But once you've got that, you can go ahead with registering or filing your tax returns with your registration number. So you will need to complete Form 990T. It's called the Exempt Organization Business Income Tax Return, Form 3468, which is related to the investment tax credit, and Form 3800, General Business Credit. There are organizations, again, like I said, Lawyers for Good Government, that kind of help nonprofits for free through this process. They use a partner called Giraffe that can support like all the electronic submissions of the tax return. There are other organizations that do that service as well. And then once you've submitted your tax forms, you're waiting for your credit payment. So let's see here, I'm reading my notes again. If the required tax forms are filed on time and correctly, the IRS says organizations can expect refund payments within 45 days after the applicable filing deadline. So after your deadline. If you were able to turn in your tax return early, it still can't happen any sooner than your tax return deadline. So just keep that in mind. And it could actually take a lot longer too. Here at the city, we've seen it take longer, but we've heard of other organizations that have gotten it perfectly fine on time. So it's just once it goes to the IRS, it can be kind of tricky to figure out like where are things at, but legally you are waiting to receive your tax credit through the elective pay process. Overall process, it's important to note that since organizations receiving elective pay as a tax refund, they will not receive their cash payment. Well, it's not like in cash, it's a electronic payment or check until after they have placed their property in service, submitted pre-filing registration and gotten your registration number, filed your tax credit or filed your tax return for the relevant credits, and then the IRS has to process everything on their end and send the refund check. So there's a period of time between when you've paid your contractor, when your project has been placed in service, and when you do finally get your check. So just pulling this back all together, the Solarize nonprofits timeline. So this program launched June 8th. We're specifically trying to help tax-exempt entities take advantage of the tax credit before the deadline of the end of next year. If you're interested, we're really encouraging folks to submit your intake, your interest on southwestohiosolar.org. You'll get set up with a meeting with RE-volv to determine which kind of category you might fall into, and that's pretty much distributed along the lines of the size of your system. So larger projects over 25 kilowatts, those will probably then go with down the RE-volv route. If you stick with our program, projects that are under 25 kilowatts would be eligible to participate in Solar United Neighbors co-op, which will include residents and small commercial businesses, so long as they're under that 25 kilowatt size. So that co-op is going to launch in September, and we'll have that big recruitment phase for homeowners and resident folks that are interested. An installer will be selected through that process. The approach here is a bulk purchasing process, so it benefits the installer because they have access to a certain quantity of work, and then it benefits the residents and small commercial sites that are participating because of that bulk purchasing benefit of, kind of like going to Costco. When you buy in bulk, it's a little cheaper. The co-op sign-up deadline, if you're in that category 1, in the orange up top, is December 1st. Proposal costs are good for 60 days past the end of the co-op. So whatever installer had been selected for the co-op, those prices are good for 60 days afterwards. And then you'll go into that whole process of construction and eventual tax filing. If you're owning your own project. I should say that the next one of these webinars will focus on the different types of ways that you can go solar, because the tax credit is primarily relevant for folks who are doing their own systems and want to own their own systems. But there are ways where you can do third-party ownership, like a power purchase agreement for nonprofits, and that allows the organization to get the benefit of purchasing solar that's being generated on their roof or on a ground-mounted system in the backyard or what have you, but not having to be the owner of the system and conducting the O&M, the operations and maintenance and that sort of thing. So there are different ways to own the system. The tax credit is most relevant for folks who are actually going to own their own system. Just want to throw that out there. And hopefully I didn't misspeak anywhere. I'd love to hear from our panel of experts if I have misspoken, but we're going to go ahead and go into the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing, and let's see. So thanks for listening to that probably rather dry presentation. I want to reintroduce everybody. We've got Mariah Williams from Solar United Neighbors, Tierney Sheehan from RE-volv and Rob McCracken from the city of Cincinnati. I guess, do we have any questions in the chat? Doesn't look like it. Maybe we go ahead and just do hand raised. I see Stephanie Bacher from Great Parks.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for all that information again. And I'm just curious to know if solar EV charging units would be covered under this. So not roof mount and not necessarily ground mount, but a portable version of EV charging that includes solar.
My first instinct is that a solar system is a solar system and it would be eligible. What about you, panelists?
I would just wonder, given that the EV charging credit has ended, I don't know what the IRS is going to consider that as. Are they going to consider that as an EV charger that is powered by solar, or solar that is powered by an EV charger? So I think that would be the question we'd want to have answered.
I think the question that I would bring up is how portable are we talking? Like if you're talking one of these very temporary type units, like you can go purchase at Costco and bring home same day, or Micro Center, most likely not. But if you're talking like the beam arcs that are a parking space and you have to have like special equipment that drops it into place, they can be moved, but it's not like two guys in a moving truck are taking care of that for you. Those may be eligible because it's semi-permanent, and its primary function is to gather the solar energy, and then it's just how it's dispensing it. It's not grid tied, but it is a solar device. So I would definitely want to consult with like some tax experts. You might want to talk to your manufacturer as well, because like Beam, they've got great folks there that would be able to answer that. But if it's, like I said, if it's something super temporary, I would guess no. I do know that some of our cities here in Central Ohio have been putting in parking lot canopies. Again, that's a more permanent structure. You're building like your roof basically and putting it over it, and then attaching EV charging, that the canopy is then eligible. The EV charging is not anymore. So.
Great, thank you. We have been looking at the Beam Arc system for sure, so that hits home. There's also a battery component to those, depending on what you order, so perhaps that might qualify it as well.
Yeah, I mean that's going to again be asked them, because most of their batteries, I'm pretty sure, are now produced here in the US, but we're going to get into the PFE kind of area with some of that additional pieces and equipment. So, unless you've already broke ground or whatever their qualification on that is before that July 4th cutoff. So I would definitely follow up with Beam. I used to know folks there, but I think they've both moved on. But they're always great at answering questions quickly.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Okay. So we got a little bit of a different situation. We've got a solar setup that was set up by like Solar City about 10 years ago. And now it's leased from them, basically now Tesla, I guess it is. And there's a buyout option, and I'm wondering if any of these tax credits would relate to a potential buyout option that would then basically move ownership of this system to us.
I don't know. Has anyone else encountered this situation on the panel?
Yeah, that would be a retroactive thing, and it is a no. So you're not the original owner of it.
Right.
You were a leasee of that, or power purchase agreement holder. So, but either way, if there were any credits to be had back then, somebody else already took them. So it'd be like if you got a system now, whoever's holding that lease, whoever the owner of the system is the one taking the credit. So purchasing it now is just you're buying out your lease. So it would be your system. You would get all the energy off of it, but you're not going to get the tax credits.
All right. Thank you. It's good to know.
Maxwell Littlejohn.
Hey everybody, Nikki, great job on the presentation. The one thing I was curious about, the tax credits, anything on top of the ITC 30%, is it true that there's an application window and then there's actually like a certain funds amount, so when they're done, they're done? Is anybody able to talk a little bit more on that?
I think Rob could definitely speak to that with how we've applied for our various tax credits at the city.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the only bonus tax credit that has the limited funding amount is the low income tax credit. So that's, as Nikki said, that's competitive, and that is because of that limited pool of funding. I think it's in February is when that portal opens, and you enter some information about your project, and then it takes the Department of Energy longer than you want for them to get back to you to tell you that you received the credit or not. So that one is the one that's kind of fund restricted by the amount of funds available. I believe they have like a tracker on their website. We got in early, so weren't necessarily worried about this part, but that kind of shows like how subscribed the different categories are, because there are different categories within that depending on the type of organization you are or the type of system it is that you're installing. So, those other bonus credits that Nikki referred to, those are, available to anyone who is eligible. It's just that low income community or low income residential projects that are competitive, and that is either January or February where that window opens for the application. And so if you're interested in this, I see that Mariah just said February 2nd. So that's when you want to be prepared to apply for that, if you're interested in doing this.
Anyone else? Stephanie again?
Surprise. So what does the application for the low income credit open every year, or is this the end of that?
The legislation said it was supposed to open every year, and so they do have another one scheduled for 27. So, we are hopeful that continues to open as planned.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Before we take any more questions, I do kind of have a broad question for our panelists. What do you think is maybe something that catches people off guard or like surprises people most frequently that you've experienced either yourself, Rob applying for the city, or Mariah and Tierney helping other organizations go solar? I'd be very curious to hear, like, what are some common, tips, tricks, things you should be aware of? Don't forget this type of things.
Well, I guess I can try to go first here. I think that one of the issues that, and Nikki brought this up, that a lot of people are concerned about is, if I start down this path and file this, am I going to have to file this every year? The answer to that is no. The other thing is that when you file the 990T, it is only asking for information relative to this project. So you're not talking about how much, what your annual budget is of your nonprofit organization, anything like that. You're saying, we did a project, it costs X amount, it's eligible for this amount of tax credit. Here's how much you need to, where we should receive. So you're really, this 990T is focused strictly on this, and you're not required to file any other forms. So I think that's an important thing. And this is separate from, payroll taxes, anything else you may do for employees of your organization. So I think that's one of the big things, is a concern that I'm a nonprofit, I've never done this before, I don't want to have to do this again. Just know that it's only something you need to do when you want to receive this tax credit, and what you're filing is limited to information pertaining to the project itself and not to your organization as a whole.
You want to go next, Tierney?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm happy to jump in here. So for the RE-volv tracks, that's over 25 kilowatts. So RE-volv actually helps nonprofits go through the elective pay filing process. So we have 2 financing options for nonprofits looking to go solar, both, or 2 that are third-party ownership, which means RE-volv, since we're also a nonprofit, is we file on behalf of your nonprofit and then pass along those savings to you. So that's one thing. If you are in that boat of over 25 kilowatts, is like we handle all of the technical nuance. And then in the option where you directly own the system, which is our loan product, we help you through all of these milestones that Nikki, so well laid out here. And so that's just something to consider. And so I'm on our communications team, so not in the weeds like our solar team, who we have a specific specialist who works with lawyers for good governance and all of the other entities that Nikki laid out to do the actual filing for our third-party ownership models. But I think something that's been surprising to me is seeing how, yes, this is complicated and there's nuance, but organizations are successfully getting direct pay, right? And so just remembering that as you go through the process, and RE-volv is here to help you. And then Nikki, if I can also make a little bit more detail on our financing offerings, is they're all zero money down. So you put no money down, and it's all designed to help you save roughly 15% or more on all of your energy bills for the whole term of our agreement. And then we donate the solar system to you at the end of the financing term. So happy to share more about that. Our solar team would be if you reach out via the consultation link on the Solarize nonprofits page. So yeah.
Well, I got lucky, and Rob and Tierney already covered a couple parts of it. So that 990T form, that pre-registration, it's very confusing to a lot of folks. They're not used to having to do that. It's not something that we see for other things. And so that kind of gets folks off to a bad start sometimes. And then, power purchase agreements, leases, TPOs, because, not everybody understands that they're not the owner. It's on their roof. They're seeing it. They're benefiting from it. And so they kind of like conflate in their heads who does get to take what. But the other things that we see is that the guidance is not stationary. We've seen changes even at the start under the Biden administration, that they had to do a whole lot of explainers after it first came out. And there were some little adjustments to it. And now, of course, that we're impacted by the BBB, we've seen a lot of changes happen to it. So it's constantly in flux, and what your rules are today may not be your rules tomorrow. I'm sure you're all seeing in the news where we've got new equipment limitations because any of those inverters that weren't already approved, yesterday the FCC stepped in, and now they have different rules in place for the approval process. And temporarily, nobody's going to be getting approvals if the inverter comes from a foreign source. So, we're going to have to be working around that, looking into what that impact will look like. For materials already on the ground, we're good to go. For companies already approved, it's good to go. But, that's sure to make some ripples in the supply chain moving forward. The bonus adders get confusing for a lot of people, which ones are competitive, which ones aren't, how to apply those, when you need to be making sure that those are being checked on, if they end up being eligible or not, because it's not always cut and dry as it looks like, like you were hearing about the income qualified one and the, energy area ones that, you've got to make sure you're in the map. You've got to make sure that people you're serving are in the map. You've got to make sure that, you're in the application window. So there's a lot of parts and pieces to those. Your tax advisor is about to become your best friend. You'll be consulting them regularly throughout this. I think that's the biggest ones. Maybe a little bit of stuff about placed in service versus commenced construction, but that one's a little easier to understand and figure out. But both very term things that we do see come up.
Yeah, I don't want to scare people away from going solar. I want to convey that we have a program with very knowledgeable and experienced partners that are able to provide the technical assistance, and that's why going through a program like this is so beneficial, because it can be kind of tricky to figure out on your own. But again, Solar United Neighbors in Ohio has done a lot of different installations. RE-volv has done installations all across the nation, and so there's experience here and precedent and folks that can help the participants in the program, get the support they need and get the solar that they want.
And Nikki, I'll just add that this can sound very overwhelming. I know when we were first looking at the direct pay for the city and watching all these webinars as people were trying to figure it out and explain it to us, I was like, what have we gotten ourselves into? I've gone through the pre-registration process now 3 times. I've applied for the low income bonus adder 2 times, for a total of 9 different projects. And the first year I filled out all the tax forms on my own, really relying heavily on resources from Lawyers for Good Government and others. And we were successful. And so it sounds overwhelming, but there are a lot of great resources out there, whether it's in this group or some of the outside groups that Nikki mentioned, that can help make this process a lot easier and a lot less overwhelming than it sounds.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I've been very impressed to see how flexible the industry has been over the changes in the tax credit. And so yes, like through joining this program, you have all of us as supports, but we have our own coalitions that we're, vetting new processes. We're in deep discussion over, foreign entities of concern, all of this stuff. So just knowing that, we're also keeping a finger on the pulse to how the industry is changing, how these tax credits are changing, to make sure that you guys can get those rebates. And then I'll also mention on the RE-volv front, if you'd like to know more about our experience with elective pay. So transparently, we have our own sort of filing team, and that's not me, so I can't answer the technical questions. We have 2 amazing experts here on the panel. But we do have a lot of amazing stories of nonprofits who have gone solar, including 3 in Ohio. And so we've helped over 130 nonprofits nationwide go solar. And so, there are lots of videos if you guys want to explore those, and your, testimonials from nonprofit executive directors themselves. So if you're feeling like, oh, I need to convince my board or my team, we have those resources for you. And so, I'm happy to share a link that Nikki can circulate after as well.
Any outstanding questions, or I'll give you a little bit of time back. Okay, well, I really hope that folks who are interested go ahead and go on that southwestohiosolar.org website, submit your interest, get started with kind of that intake process so we can decide, you know, would you be a category 1 with the co-op or a category 2 with RE-volv? There's no requirement that's like making you sign up and follow through on getting solar. So it does no harm to go ahead and express your interest and understand and get a little more one-on-one, like technical assistance and understanding what's possible for you and your organization. And the next one of these will be in a couple weeks. We'll be focused on, you know, financing and direct ownership versus third-party ownership models. And then the third one will be coming, and we'll be kind of talking about some more sort of out there topics related to, you know, battery backup storage, or what's net metering, and what are solar renewable energy credits and things like that. Buzzwords that you may have heard, and so definitely come with your questions for that one as well. And I think I will go ahead and just plop those links in the chat so that folks can go ahead and register for those. Of course, I didn't have this teed up already, but it was a bright idea that came to my brain. Here's the next one. And the third one here. And you can sign up there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tierney, Mariah, Rob, for your insights and advice. Really appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody, for taking your lunch hour and hanging out with us. Have a good one.